Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to Thoughts of the Young Icon with me, Sam. Today, I want to start a little series that I call Five Important Lessons I Learned from Some Very Special Individuals in My Life. In today's video, being the first of this series, I'm going to talk about the five important lessons I learned from my father. Enjoy the video. So today I want to share some important lessons that I learned from a man who I admire a lot. My father is someone who I've looked up to my whole life. My father has such an inspiring story. He grew up in one of the most rural parts of Malawi and he worked hard. He worked hard in school. He worked hard just to survive. He went ahead with his tertiary education, got a job, started at the bottom, and rose all the way to the top. And now he runs his own businesses. My father is such an inspiring man. When I look at my life, when I see who I am, I wouldn't be who I am if it had not been for him. So for his sacrifices and for everything that he's done for me, I'm very grateful. And today I just want to honor him and also just talk about some of the important lessons I've learned in my life, not just from him telling me, but also from observation. So the first lesson that I want to share with you that I learned from my father is to put God first and the importance of having God in my life. I grew up in a home that is a traditional Malawian Christian home whereby my father made it a point that we went to church every Sunday. My father gave us a foundation by, teaching us Bible verses at home. He would make sure that we memorize Bible verses. And he introduced me to Christ Jesus at such a young age. And for that, I'm very grateful. My father, when I was growing up, I would look at his life and I would observe him. And he was a man who actually put Christ first. He was a man, like the Bible describes David, a man after God's own heart. So by watching his life, seeing how he put God first, seeing how he was someone who acknowledged God, he was someone who was not shy of his faith. That's a lesson that I learned from him. And even with me, I'm sure you've seen in all the other videos, I'm not shy about my faith. I'm not shy about what I believe. And I like to tell it to the world because it's something which has improved my life. It's something which has made my life beautiful. So that was the first lesson that I learned from my father, that God is first and God is the most important thing in your life. When he shares with me his stories about how he grew up in the village, in the rural part of Lilongwe, in this area called Nkoma, DH Dekwere to be specific. It's a place which a lot of people probably never heard of. And there he was. Missionaries had come to an area close to them and they'd set up a school. And so that's how he got to know of God. And so he learns of God and he trusted in God. And he always shares with me about how he trusted in God and how that is the reason why everything turned out the way it did for him. Because he shares stories on how other people, things didn't work out for them very well in the same parts. It's not like everyone from his village is a success story. No, but he accredits everything to God. Now it takes us to lesson number two that I learned from my father, which is that everything we have is by God's grace and not by our efforts. This is something which I admire a lot about my dad. It's something which he says outright and openly. You know, he's a brilliant man. Like, you cannot take that away from him. He's a brilliant intellectual. He's When you sit and you chat with him, you realize that, he's not an ordinary person. Intellectually, he's gifted and he's a hard worker. But one thing that my father always makes sure to bring out in every conversation and anytime he does something great is that it's not just by his effort, but it's by the grace of God. This concept of the grace of God is something that us Christians sometimes we take very lightly. We are so used to miracles, we are so used to things happening in the divine, and we start to normalize it to the point that we start to take God out of it. It's like you accepting the miracle, but you taking God out of it by not acknowledging Him. And it's important to testify, but it's also important to testify correctly. you in your testimony, you share the steps that you took. Yes, that's beautiful, but always acknowledge God. So that's one of the lessons which I learned from my father. My father, I've seen him over the years do some pretty amazing things. I've seen my dad go from assistant manager to manager. I've seen him go from that to executive positions. And every time I talk to him, not once has he ever said, "No, Sam, it's because I'm a brilliant man. No, Sam, it's because I work hard." No, he always, and I mean always, says to me that, "Sam, everything that I have, the positions that I've been privileged to find myself in, is by the grace of God." And this is an important lesson that I too have taken up, because I've realized that in this life, there's some privileges which I've seen. There's heights that I've reached which perhaps a lot of people will never reach. And can I say that it is by my effort? No, no, not really, because I know people who have worked much harder than I have and haven't achieved, not even half of what I've been able to achieve in my 32 years thus far. So for me, just that lesson that you need to acknowledge God, you need to acknowledge the grace. It has been a very pivotal one, because what I've noticed is the more that I have acknowledged God in the things that He's doing in my life, the more that I have mentioned His grace, is the more that I've experienced it. And the more I've experienced the grace, is the higher that I've risen. So I think that's a very important lesson for, those of you who are watching. When you notice the grace of God upon your life, don't be shy about it. Call it out. So yes, this is by the grace of God, and I'm rising by the grace of God. And when you do that, it means the grace in your life is increased, the grace in your life is encouraged, and then you start to see even greater and greater things. Important lesson number 3 that I learned from my father is how to operate and how to relate with people as a wana. This is a very perhaps controversial, but it's something which I think is very, very important in this life. There's a chapter in my upcoming book where I discuss how in Malawi there's no such thing as generational wealth, or there hadn't been. The unfortunate thing about Malawi is that being a fairly new republic, being a fairly new independent country, we don't have a rich heritage. We don't have a situation whereby, there's families that can trace, quote unquote, their wealth 3, 4, 5 generations. If you can trace your wealth even 2 generations, that's such a rarity in Malawi, especially for the indigenous population. And so what has happened is that when you grow up in a life of a bit of privilege, what ends up happening is a lot of people become spoiled. A lot of people become brats. That's like the second generation who are kind of being born into this life of privilege. And the unfortunate thing is that, from my observation, a lot of people who have grown up in the sort of life and the sort of upbringing that I've had have ended up messing up their lives. They've ended up, taking the wrong turns, and they've ended up they have ended up far shorter than their fathers. Because my father, like I said, he was born in a village and he comes into town and he makes a life for himself. And then for me, it's like I'm observing my dad, and now there's 2 things that I could have done. I could have observed my dad and then become a spoiled brat. I would have been entitled. But my father, one of the things that he made sure to instill in me is how to relate with people at every level. My dad is someone who, he has done pretty well for himself. Actually, by many measures, very, very well. When I think of my father, when I think of where he's come from and where he is now, I want to say he's like 1,000 times better off. And because of this, I looked at his life and I looked at this man who, if he had been someone else, he could have had a heart of pompousness. He could have had a heart of pride. But my dad is one of those people who is a bwana, and that's the Chichewa word for a boss. My dad is someone who's like a bwana, but he's someone who's down to earth. He's someone who can relate with everyone. But at the same time, because he's a Bwana, there's an element of confidence that he carries himself with. There's an element of imposition that that goes about him. In his speech, his choice of words. Yes, he will interact with everyone, but my dad is not someone who is going to allow anyone to take advantage of him. Is not My dad is not the kind of guy who is going to be intimidated by another character because he is also a strong character. But he's not just a strong character. He's a Bwana. He's someone who's accomplished. So from observing him, I learned how to carry myself as a Bwana as well. And what I've noticed is that has helped me in opening doors with other people of that caliber. The unfortunate thing here in Malawi is that there's a little bit of a syndrome whereby people feel inferior to someone who is grossly superior to them in status, in social status, in financial ranking, and things like that. And what I learned from my father is, even before you get to the top, what you need to do is you need to learn how to conduct yourself as someone who is at the top. So by observing my father, observing the way he interacts with his peers, I've also, from a young age, there I was fresh out of college. I mean, I used to work a sales job, and this is me at age 23, 24. I'm working a sales job, and I used to interact with some of the top bosses in each organization that we were selling our online marketing to. And I was never once intimidated. I never once felt like I didn't belong in the room. And that's because my father had taught me and he had instilled in me that element of, you are a Bwana, you belong. And it's not because of who he was, but he understood that by me having that inside of me, then I can operate at that level. Then it was going to allow me to have the kind of career progression that I ended up having. Because by walking on his shoulders, by walking in his footsteps, I was also able to achieve the things that he was able to achieve. And ironically, my father and I both went into entrepreneurship at the same time. So yeah, that's lesson number 3. Lesson number 4 that I learned from my father is the importance of hard work and the understanding that a man must work if he is to eat. My dad, from a very young age, he emphasized to my brother and I the importance of working hard. My dad was one of those people who, even when we were in primary school, even when we were in secondary school, he would always sit us down and he would tell us to work hard. And the good thing with my father is he's not someone who just speaks but doesn't practice what he speaks. No, my father is someone who speaks and his actions match his words. So my father would tell us to work hard. But when we also looked at my father's life, he was a very hardworking man. He was a man who would give his all in everything. And he has this thing whereby he likes for you to know that he is working hard. He'll call me sometimes, or he'll message me sometimes, because now we do business together. So he'll message me some work things, close to midnight. And then in the following morning, I'll check out my phone when I wake up, and I'll see that he's also still messaging the other executives, the other members of the team at, say, 4 a.m. And I'm like, Dad, the last time you messaged me was close to midnight. The next time I'm seeing your messages to the rest of the team, it's like 4 a.m. And my father is such a hard worker, and he's shown me that it is really, 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 it's a necessity to work hard. Many other times that people want nice things, but they don't want to work for them. If you want nice things and you don't want to work for them, you never get the nice things that you want. As a man, you need to work hard. For women, it might be a bit different. In our society, it's very unlikely that you find a situation whereby a woman is working and a man is not working, and that's the permanent arrangement. There can be instances whereby the woman is working and the man, for one reason or another, has lost his work or he's looking for work. But it's very unusual to find a situation whereby The woman is working and the man is not working at all. So as a man, I've seen from my own father's life that you must work, and you must not just work, you must work hard, because in order to achieve extraordinary results in anything, you need to work hard. And that's something that my father has shown me. And by the example that he's set in his work ethic, I've also learned that I need to work hard. My father is one of the few Malawians who actually keeps time. My father is one of the few Malawians who's very cautious about his dressing. He's a perfectionist. Every time we're doing a project together and he gives me a document and I send it back to him for approvals, my father dots every T, like he checks everything. He's one of those guys who's going to put commas and semicolons if I missed them, because that's just the kind of man that he is. He works hard. And he showed me the importance of being a man and being a hardworking man in order to be productive. The last thing, number 5, which I want to share, a lesson which I learned from my father, number 5, is don't keep up with the Joneses. I have a story that I'd like to share about how when I had first started off at secondary school at Kumuzu Academy, there I was, a Form 1 student. I was coming from a background whereby I didn't understand anything about fashion. I wasn't cool in any sense. And I get to KA in Form 1. And, the first weekend, everyone shows up at entertainment. We used to have this thing called entertainment on Saturday evenings, where basically every form would gather. It would either be like either movie or disco or a variety of things, a variety show, drama. And it was like a social gathering, and it was where people would show up wearing their best gear. Now here I didn't have any elder siblings, so I didn't know anything about this when I first was going to school. And some of my peers, they knew about this because they had older siblings, and some of them were just already cool. Like, I went to school and I wasn't cool, and they were already cool. And I remember they came out with their gear. They were wearing June and sneakers. They were wearing their Fort Farm shirts, their Fubu. Back in the day, they were in their Nike. They were in velvet tracksuits. And I thought, man, this is the coolest thing ever. And there I was wearing my China China shop bought clothes. And I went home after first term and I started nagging my dad, and I'm telling him, no, I want this, I want that. And my dad saying, no. I'm like, no, you don't love me. And my dad, he sat me down and he told me, Sam, you need to understand who you are. You need to understand where you come from. You need to have values based off of where you come from. And you don't keep up with the Joneses. Like, you don't need to be like everyone else. You don't need to try and have everything that everyone else has. Yes, and he made it clear to me to say, yes, I don't want you to feel out of place ever. But at the same time, I don't need you to find value in things which are valueless according to the values that we hold as a family and as Christians. And that was such a big lesson for me, because from that moment on, I've been in a lot of places, and I've seen, I've interacted with a lot of people, and many of them super wealthy. And I don't stress myself. I've never stressed myself about trying to be like so and so. I've never stressed myself about trying to appear a certain way, and especially that certain way being a way in which I'm not yet. Like, heck, I don't have the latest iPhone. I'm not trying to get every latest iPhone. I'm not trying to get every latest this and that, the latest car. I'm not in a position to do that at the moment. And I understand that. And I know of certain people who, because of trying to keep up with the Joneses, they've gone on to do some pretty dodgy things, like stealing from their companies. Um, they've gone on to indulge in corruption, and so many shady things that a lot of people have ended up doing because they're trying to keep up with the Joneses. But I learned early from my father that run your own race. Yes, have ambitions, have things that you desire, have things that you want, but don't push yourself to the point whereby you end up doing something just to keep up appearances to people who don't even care. And that's the lesson that I learned. A lot of times we're trying to keep up appearances, and we're trying to keep up appearances with people who we think care. Look, if you have a very nice car, and I remember when I bought my Ford Ranger, I got a couple of congratulations in the first week or so. But shortly after that, everyone was just kind of used to, hey, that's what Sam drives. It wasn't the it thing anymore. And a couple of days after that, another friend of ours got like a really nice car, and they were now the talk of the town. And that's when you realize that this whole trying to keep up with the Joneses, it's like you're just trying to have attention on you. But is that really healthy? I mean, why do you want so much attention on you? There's no point. So those are the lessons which I learned from my father, a very wise man, and I hope that they're lessons that you will also take into your life. Consider them, just think about it, and I hope that they will improve your life the way they did mine. If you've watched this far, I'd like you to hit that like button. I'd like you to hit subscribe. And don't forget to tell a friend about Thoughts of the Young Icon. Thank you very much.